Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here with all of you experts. And so I'm not going to even try to compete with you in your area of expertise, because my area of expertise is very different, and it's to do with the cultural governance, the behavioral governance of decision making, and in particular in investment decision making. And you're going to ask, why am I here talking about all of that to you? And the answer to that is, I think our communities suffer with the same kind of mindset problem. And Mike sort of said it very well. He said, we're very good at the maths, right? We have that sorted. We don't get this uncertainty. And I think some of the uncertainty that we're not getting relates to these things, which we kind of take for granted as being sort of outside our job. And actually, that's the problem. I'm going to be quite challenging. You've had a whole morning of interesting, very technical input. So I'm going to give you something to kind of chew over lunch and maybe come back to me and come back to each other on. So be warned, I'm going to be challenging. But I thought I'd also start by being positive, which is to say really clearly that I personally believe that the corporate system, the capitalist system, can deliver exactly what we need at this moment in time. It is hugely able to focus on long-term wealth creation. We know that. It doesn't have to just focus on share price growth. It can do really amazing innovation. Doesn't often, but can do. If you listen to people like Clay Christensen, you understand how it could do that. It's well able to use its technological expertise to deal with our eco-resources crunch. If any of you have read the McKinsey Bible about the eco-resources crunch, you'll understand why that's a strategic imperative, which we're just kind of ignoring at our peril. It's got the ability to make quite big cultural changes, which might allow it and other parts to survive in societies like the Arab area, where kind of income inequality is a big underlying driver of the instability and the coups that we're talking about. And it can also have huge influence with governments for the public good. That expertise, if you look at, for example, the reinsurance industry and its understanding of climate change and how it engages with governments in order to protect its interests, but also how it brings public benefit out of that. So it can do lots of very interesting things. And actually, that is the purpose of the corporate sector at this moment in time. And if you look at the kind of thought leaders from the business intelligence communities and the universities like Harvard, they're actually identifying that the challenge today is to turn the problems that we like blaming others about, society, governments, other communities, or whatever. They're about changing those challenges into collaborative growth opportunities. And some sectors are doing it. This is not a perfect company. I'm not holding it up as a kind of paragon of virtue. But what I am saying is that they know that they're heavily dependent on fishing, for example, and fish stocks, and they know fish stocks are being depleted, and they know that they can't outcompete their competitors in that situation. They can shift the sector to it, to deal with it. So they created the Marine Stewardship Council. They know that customer pressure is growing, so they're aligning with customer pressure. Here's, coming back to what the analyst thinks, this company is outperforming its peer, its P&G peer. It's doing well. And I'm just not talking about nice kind of retail-facing, consumer-facing companies, right? Just recently, the Vatican hosted the CEOs of not an exactly nice industry, the mineral mining sector. The mineral mining sector have many of the same problems as the oil and gas sector. I can't imagine, maybe I'm wrong, but I can't imagine the oil and gas CEOs trotting off to the Vatican for this similar kind of discussion today. I'm not saying it's the only answer, but I'm saying it's indicative. So, what am I saying? And chuck the tomatoes at me gently, please. But the sector has a bad reputation, right? I'm not saying anything you don't know. If you go just objectively, this is a specialist research organization, very business friendly. It's actually been sold to a SellSide research house. It identifies that the oil and gas sector is unique in being a high impact sector, but also a sector that actually rarely sets its own targets for change. This is from 2011. I don't think things have changed very much. We all know about the safety problems, even on some very basic health and safety issues. When I talk to people in the unions, I regularly get the oil and gas sector named as the sector which finds it hardest to deal with constructive union whistleblowing activity. We have countries like Equatorial Guinea. John Bennett is the former US ambassador to that country, and he's pretty normal, sane, mainstream kind of diplomat. It's not just one country, it's not just a few countries, it's not just one issue. And it's not just that it happens out there, and we are unfortunately the benefit, the passive victims of it. We create it. Our trade associations block the changes that would make it better and easier. So we're not passive recipients of an unfortunate oil curse. And it's not just, here, it's there as well. Chandeliers and hotels and, things are pretty serious across all the oil and gas companies, not just one. This is not it's not a conversation about one company. So, what am I saying? I'm saying that we need deep cultural change in order to prevent those uncertainties from becoming risks which are difficult, what someone's called high impact, low probability, the black swans. They're not really black swans, they're just things that we allow to happen because of the bad culture. And the culture is going to be changed as a result of insiders and outsiders working. We know about consumers and campaigners, they're very active. We know about regulators, they can be useful. But actually, what I want to talk about, and now I've beaten you guys up, I want to beat up my community, which is the investment community, because I think they co-create the dysfunctional risk management culture that we experience today. Investors, I think, are the key to change. They are the most powerful influence on the board of directors that you can imagine. And why? Because, they define the bonus structure, they define where Tony goes to his next job. They define practically everything. And that's what the capitalist system is about, right? Shareholders. And I think particularly important in the investment system are the people at the top of the gravy chain, the asset stewards. Some people call them asset owners. They're not asset owners. You, me, and the other people who invest in pensions and insurance companies are the asset owners. These people are our stewards, and they have huge influence should they choose to use it. And I'm not talking about the tiny little pension funds. I'm talking about the sovereign wealth funds, the very large foundations, effectively the state retirement funds. The challenge is, and I said I was going to be sort of challenging to everyone in the room and out, the challenge is those long-term investors really act as if they were long-term investors. They act much more as if they're short-term traders. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And one of the things that I want to kind of raise with you is that people aren't bad people, either in the investment system or when you're in the oil and gas sector. They're just doing what it's sort of reasonable to do given where they are in the system. And we have to therefore look at system change, culture change, if we're going to shift that. And I won't go into all the details because I don't have time and I don't want this to happen to me, about why the system works as it does in the investment system, but believe me, it's as dysfunctional as some of the things that you've heard. Investors are trying to do things. So some of you might have heard about a thing called the Carbon Disclosure Project. Large, very big investment banks and pension funds and asset owners have come together and said, we care about your carbon footprint. Well, they may care about the carbon footprint and they're joining the project, but it's not really affecting the carbon footprint of the companies that they're invested in. And this data is out there, so it's not that they're unaware of this kind of greenwash factor. The problem is our sector is as intermediated as your sector is, and probably worse so. When people think about investors, they think about maybe the pension funds, maybe the big fund managers, the PIMCOs on the fixed income side or the Schroders on the equity side. What they don't realize, and this is a little secret I'm letting you into, is that these people, these people don't have the power. It's these people, the SellSide Analysts and credit rating agencies who have the power, and the investment consultants these kind of gatekeepers who have the power, they also don't think they have the power, but actually that's where the power lies. And they're the kind of benchmark setters for the other parts. So, for example, it would be very hard for a buy-side analyst to completely ignore the sell-side consensus estimates. There's too much personal career risk to take a punt and be wrong for too long. It's important to understand this in order to see how serious the problem is and why you guys are being faced with these very, very short-term quarterly numbers. Because unless you really understand why that kind of pressure is on your executive and the board, you won't know how to change it. And actually, it won't matter if you take the best, intelligence to the board about what it needs to do, because actually it will have its eye on what's more important. What's the consensus earnings estimate and how do we not miss it? The good news is that things are changing in the investment system. There is a project in the investment system called the Principles of Responsible Investment. It's a sort of sister project to a project you may know about called the Global Compact. Do folks know about the Global Compact? Yeah, some nods. So it's a kind of project to get together big companies to be more responsible. So that's the Global Compact project. This is a sister project to bring together the big investors. And what's really interesting is some of the very big investors are now part of this project. So the Norwegian Global Fund, the Canadian Pension Plan, Kelsters, Kelpers, the big Dutch funds, PIMCO, all these very big investment players are part of this project, and it basically accounts for about 1 in 10 investment dollars. So I'm not talking about, the nice tree huggers who go off and buy a nice ethical or green or SRI fund. I'm talking about the very big players. And it's changing behavior. So the Environment Agency Pension Fund, the Environment Agency is responsible in the UK for looking after the environment. It was embarrassed by a big media campaign coordinated by campaigners to sort of show how its pension fund was doing, in their words, harm, whilst the organisation was supposed to be looking after the Environment Agency. The agency is actually very responsive to that kind of pressure and instituted a strategic review which led it going from being considered a laggard on the pension side to being a leader on the sustainable investment side. What's interesting also is that its financial performance increased significantly. I'm not saying the two are directly linked, but it goes to the argument that doing this thing is bad for investment. It wasn't. So there are some good stories. There are some kind of Unilever stories within the sector as well. The problem is it's not the norm. And I trained as a doctor originally, and so I'm trained in sort of pattern recognition and patient diagnosis. And I see 5 types of patients in the financial sector, and I have a colleague here from the financial sector, so you can tell me if I'm being too flippant. But the first group I would describe as the happy imbeciles. Those folks who kind of say, yeah, health and safety, isn't that something that, the kind of person has to deal with about holding the rail as they walk down the steps? Yeah, it's not for us. We do the analysis. Then you have the supportive pessimists. These are very clever people, and they say, yes, this is a very important part of management quality, but management can hide the data, and it's not very transparent, and it's not easy to compare. So for the moment, we don't take it into account. Then you've got the denialists. They kind of say, yeah, of course we take it into account. We're always looking at quality of management. What's the problem? The market efficiency fundamentalists are also quite honest, a bit like the happy imbeciles, and they kind of say, well, if it's important, it's in the price, and if it's not in the price, then it's not important. And of course they're right. And when it comes into the price, then it becomes important. And then most recently, you have the sustainability smooth talkers, which I guess some of you might say, my community. I don't work in the industry anymore for reasons which are probably obvious. And they would go, yes, this is really important, and we have a specialist team, and we've done this research on health and safety, and here it is. They forget to tell you that 95% or 99% of the money they manage isn't actually aligned with the specialist research. The consequence of these 5 dysfunctional financial types is an contribution to this kind of event. Just to remind us, major health and safety incident, knocked out at one time 50% of the share price of one of the biggest companies. It knocked out £1 in 7 of dividends for UK pension funds. It almost led to the company being split up, and at one point there was talk of the Kremlin being the largest shareholder in this rather prestigious British company. Not a surprise. James Baker, that well-known radical, lefty green tree hugger, when he did the review, gave a whole series of recommendations which the company duly, because it's a very professionally run company, implemented. One comment he made was that there's a safety culture problem. It ignored that recommendation. It practically still does. And yet that feature, that culture problem, has been a recurrent feature of all the other studies that have been done on all these other events. OSHA giving the largest fine, it said because it wanted to send a signal to the market. Azerbaijan not even reported to many investors. So, culture. Investors, no message received. That's a comment from a leading financial analyst on the day after Deepwater. The problem is, and remember my little map of the kind of network, the sell-side analysts, who are the key gatekeepers for what's considered important, don't get this. They don't get health and safety. I'm sorry to say, and I know many. We did a study. I was at a very large fund management organization. We had practically all the reports. So we did a very basic study, which was a word search. So we looked at all the reports, and we looked for any word related to fine, Baker, death, OSHA, health, safety, blow up, etc., etc. And we found 6 occurrences every 100 pages. And that figure didn't really change after the event much. So every sell-side report is roughly about 20 pages. So basically, most reports didn't even have a word related to this highly material factor. So it can't be in the model if it's not even in a word. Hirsch Schreffrin, and Mike was talking about the kind of behavioral side. Hirsch is a very famous behavioral financial commentator. And he did a much better study than my study, which was both qualitative and quantitative. And what he found was that as the share price was tanking, the analyst community became more and more bullish about the company. There was not one hold, buy, or sell at that point. That herding behavior that you talked about is worse on our side. And it's not that the community don't get it, right? The community do get it. They understood what BP's advantage was. They just misinterpreted the intelligence factor of it. Now, I've beaten up on my colleagues on the sell side. Let me beat up on my side, the buy side, the asset owners. Are we any better? No. In a country which prides itself about good corporate governance codes and stewardship and all the like, only 60% of the capital shareholders voted at the AGM after the event, and of those, 60% voted in favour of the chair of the Health and Safety Committee that had presided over a lot of that. Can you imagine investors doing that with a finance director or someone else? It's just impossible. And actually, investors had overridden their default recommendations from their proxy voting agencies. So actually, they'd taken a conscious decision to vote with management. The company is extremely good at influencing its investors, but that doesn't mean that investors should be stupid. The dominant narrative, and it's not just with this company, it's with preventable surprises in the financial sector, is ain't me gov, broadly. This man was going to be in the candidate run for the president of the US. He thought we could blame God. This man who was passing through the company said it wasn't his problem 4 years after he left. And this man said it's dangerous to join up the dots that I was just talking about. Someone else's problem. We don't know whose problem it is, but it's someone else's problem. Actually, it's not. It's the culture, the system that we create. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit. If I've got a few more minutes? 5. We have 6 drivers which create this kind of event. We have a narrow conception of risk. thinking that you can monitor risk by looking at the number of direct fatalities in your own employ, not even considering suppliers, is plain stupid because it's a lag indicator. You need leading indicators. A weak concern for negative externalities is kind of really deep-rooted in the sector. Regulatory capture is something that our intelligence systems don't kind of talk about, but it's critical. You know, MMS was one of the most corrupt regulatory systems around. It's known. The National Commission spent more than one chapter of its very big report on that regulatory capture. That creates risks because actually the benchmark is dropped in that region where that kind of regulation happens. And if you look at the difference, for example, with kind of Gulf of Mexico and Florida, you kind of also see intra-country differences. Organizational learning disabilities, even in a company which has some of the best kind of academic links to Yale and this and that and the other, Stanford, this is not about technical learning, it's about what Margaret Heffernan calls willful blindness. It's the kind of intention not to know. That's the problem. And then you often have in these companies an over-dominant CEO and a weak ambassadorial board. But the bit that I want to focus on in my presentation is the bit that I have some influence and try to influence, which is that kind of pedal to the metal approach of the shareholders on, give us the TSR growth, give us the dividends, meet the quarterly number at any cost. And that any cost, this is a great study by some economists, that any cost is really at every cost. We just don't measure the cost, basically. And it's not the blow-ups that we don't measure, we sort of measure those. It's all the underlying below the pyramid, below the waterline cost that we don't measure. It's a really good study if you ever want to see about this kind of effects of short-termism in the investment system. So my narrative is a co-creating narrative. It's dolls within dolls within dolls. And so we need a different agenda if we're going to manage the risk. We need a different agenda if we're going to get a handle on the intelligence, on the soft stuff. It's not soft, it's very real, but we need a different agenda. And the agenda has to do with diversity of corporate purpose. If we can't get to responsible energy companies doing drilling in a way which is different, then we shouldn't be doing deep drilling. Whatever that means, if we can't hold CEOs accountable, where's Tony Hayward's accountability? If we can't hold them accountable, then we're just going to get more and more of these kind of blow-ups. Boards have to shift into being guardians of the long-term wealth creation of the company, not delivery mechanisms for TSR growth. They misunderstood their purpose. We need this, and it's off the agenda, and there's a reason why some accidents happen in some places. It's not just that the Norwegians do their safety differently. There's a different regulatory culture. And even if you look at, say, the Australian regulatory culture versus the US, there's a difference there. Investing as the long-term matter is really important, and that's where I focus most of my day job on. And citizens getting involved as investors is also part of the issue. And I think that kind of transparency that you were talking about needs to be part of societal transparency, because otherwise the good players don't get rewarded and the bad players don't get punished. Mike threw up one book. I want to throw up two books. Part of the answer is that the people who are part of the solution are within your sector already. They're called positive deviants in this new language. There's a ex-McKinsey consultant called Richard Pascal, who's now a Said business professor, and he's written a great book called The Power of Positive Deviance. So it's not about any kinky stuff. At least I don't know. It's actually about how you empower people within the system to do that which the system generally doesn't allow. So, why are there some Hutus who take in Tutsi families in the middle of a genocide when the benefit they stand to gain is nothing and the cost is, potentially get their head smashed in? There are always those people, and there are those people within the system as well. We need to find them, empower them, and network them, and maybe that's one of the functions of events like this. The second is this book, and it's a really practical book. It's called Giving Voice to Values. Its subtitle is How to Speak Your Mind When You Know What's Right. So it's not about these kind of intellectual, ethical, waste of time courses. It's actually, when you know you're right, how do you raise that issue? How do you tactically, strategically avoid career assassination, but still do the right thing or go in that direction? And it's got some great examples. I haven't got time to do it, but I just want to kind of highlight those two books. See, the thing is, it can be done. You know, I come back to the International Mineral and Mining Council. I come back to the Marine Stewardship Council. I come back to the post that big nuclear accident in America. What's it called? Yeah, the nuclear industry changed its regulatory approach. It became much more inclusive of its critics. Excuse me. The airline industry doesn't sort of say, "Oops, a jumbo went down. There are a few more in the air. We don't worry about that one too much." It changes. It does a very, very intensive debrief, which is collaborative, about every near miss. These things are possible. It's just, as I was explaining to one of our colleagues here, it's sort of culturally acceptable not to care. That's the bit that's the problem. The barriers, well, they can be got round. It's about consumer pressure and consultants. A lot of you, academics, a lot of you have a huge ability to be those kind of provocative, usefully constructed positive deviants. It's about addressing governance failures, actually both on the investment side as well. There are big problems there. It's about systemic change. Having an organization, if deep sea drilling, if deep sea drilling is a core competence for an oil and gas company, how come it's just completely delegated to some supply chain activity? Isn't core competency part of an organization? It's about insulating positive deviance from herd mentality, and it's about changing talent pipelines. Some of you are academics, and I think this is really important, because when the new kids come in and they ask challenging questions, management will learn. It's been done before. We went from wearing helmets to holding handrails to putting in KPIs to culture issues. And, for me, from the outside, when I look at Statoil or when I look at Exxon, I see very different approaches to other oil and gas companies on safety. We can do that more generally, and we can do it on the investment side, and we can do it on managing preventable risks. Thank you.